I sat on that bench and felt two things in the same moment, one that wore the shape of grief, and one I have no clean word for, but that felt like watching someone choose to be larger than what had been done to them. The grief was for what a man had already survived, and for what a person in a position of healing had chosen to add to that weight. The other feeling was for the way that same man walked into my courtroom 17 months later, both hands flat on the table, quiet as someone who had already made every important decision before the doors opened. I had never felt both of those things at the exact same moment before this case. I have felt them together ever since. This is why. The name of that man was Marcus Webb. I want to ask you something before I keep going. Have you ever been in a room where someone chose cruelty when silence was just as available? Subscribe, because what came after that choice, and what I eventually had to do about it from the bench, is the story I am still carrying. Subscribe and stay. Marcus was 34 years old when this began. In October of 2021, a fire burned through his Cincinnati apartment and left 40% of his face and neck permanently changed. He survived. He went through surgeries, skin grafting, the long, slow work that continues long after the dramatic part ends. And by early 2022, he had started asking a different question, not how to go back to who he had been. That question had no answer. The question now was what else might be possible. He researched surgeons. He found a name with a strong reputation for burn reconstruction. He called the office. He made an appointment for March 8, 2022. He showed up 7 minutes early and sat near the window. Dr. Alan Forsyth was 52 years old. He had practiced for 22 years, board certified in plastic and reconstructive surgery with a specific record in burn-related work, the reason Marcus had found his name. Dr. Forsyth returned from lunch at 2:15 p.m. alongside his office manager, Patricia Harmon. He entered the waiting room of his practice at 4400 Montgomery Road in Cincinnati. He saw Marcus Webb. He kept walking, and as he moved toward the door behind the reception desk, 4 people in that room heard him say, "Some cases walk in here thinking we're miracle workers. Look at that. There's nothing to work with." He did not stop when he said it. He did not look at Marcus directly. He walked through the interior door and it closed behind him. Security camera footage later entered as Exhibit 3, placed the timestamp at 2:15:43 p.m. The footage had no audio. What it captured was Marcus Webb remaining in his chair for 43 seconds after Dr. Forsyth left the room. 43 seconds. Then he stood. He walked to the elevator. He did not stop at the reception desk. He said nothing to anyone. He left. He did not say a word on his way out. I read his complaint statement before trial. He had written, "He looked at me the way I used to look at mirrors, like there was nothing worth looking at." I read that sentence twice before I turned the page. It arrived in a legal document between 2 ordinary factual sentences. It read like something carried for a long time before being finally set down. This was where the sorrow current had its deepest source, not in the fire alone, but in the 43 seconds, and what they told him about how the world was still choosing to see him, after all that work, to re-enter it. The case file arrived on my desk as a civil complaint filed in Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas in June of 2022. Primary claim, violation of Ohio Revised Code Section 4112, disability discrimination in a place of public accommodation. A medical practice qualifies under that statute. Second claim, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The Ohio State Medical Board was handling a separate professional conduct matter on its own track. My jurisdiction was the civil case. I read the file from the first page, and by the time I finished, I knew I was about to carry 2 very different rivers into one courtroom. The 4 witness statements from the waiting room were consistent. Patricia Harmon, walking beside Dr. Forsyth when he spoke, stated she had not responded in the moment. She told herself she had misheard. She said she knew that was not true while she was telling herself that. Her deposition described a pattern of looking away that had become automatic, the kind that forms around a person when the people closest to them have stopped expecting better from them. Diane Chu, the receptionist on duty that afternoon, was 26 years old. Her statement included this. She had watched Marcus stand up and walk to the elevator, and she had almost called out to him. Almost. She didn't, because she didn't know what she would have said. That almost is still in me. It is not her weight to carry, and she was 26, and her employer had just made the room into something no one had prepared her for. But that almost belongs to the sorrow, too. The specific sorrow of things people almost do and don't. If you have gone quiet right now, I understand. Subscribe. That kind of attention, the kind where you go still without deciding to, deserves the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Marcus entered my courtroom on September 12, 2023 at 8:47 in the morning. He sat at the plaintiff's table and placed both hands flat on the surface in front of him, not folded, flat like someone planting their feet before something they have decided not to be moved by. He looked directly at the bench. His attorney said something quiet before we began, and he gave one slow nod. Not the nod of someone being reassured. The nod of someone confirming what they already knew. From the bench, I could see the scar tissue along the left side of his face and neck in the courtroom light, healed but raised, the body's way of closing what could not close the original way. I want to be careful here because Marcus Webb is not a symbol. He is a person. What I can say is that watching him with both hands on that table, the full weight of what he had survived and the full weight of what he had chosen to do in that room were present at the same time. I felt both of those things while looking at him. That is the honest account of what happened in me on that first morning. Dr. Forsyth entered 12 minutes later, dark suit, leather notepad, jacket adjusted before sitting. He was tall, and his height stayed present even when seated, the specific presence of someone who has spent years being the authority in a room. He did not look toward the plaintiff's table at first, but about 40 minutes into the morning session, when Marcus's attorney was reading the security camera timestamp into the record, 2:15:43, 43 seconds, the elevator, I watched Dr. Forsyth's pen stop moving on his notepad. He had been writing steadily. The pen stopped. It did not start again for a long time. I noted it not as evidence. I had evidence, but because it was the first moment in that trial where both rivers were visible in one person at the same time. The weight of what he had done and the weight of having to sit still while it was measured back to him in exact seconds. 3 weeks before trial, Dr. Forsyth's attorney filed a motion to admit a letter into evidence. A letter Dr. Forsyth had written personally in February of 2023, 8 months after the lawsuit was filed. His attorney had advised against sending it. He sent it anyway, 2 pages, handwritten. It did not read like anything reviewed by counsel. It read like something written at a late hour when the instinct to protect yourself from liability finally gives out to something older and more insistent. He wrote about his son. His son's name was Daniel. Daniel Forsyth was 24 years old when he died in a car accident on Interstate 71 south of Columbus on a wet Tuesday morning in November of 2019. Dr. Forsyth did not describe the accident. He described what the years after it had done to him. He described performing surgeries in those months and feeling, in his own words, like I was operating inside a room I had been locked out of. He described developing a hardness he told himself was professional focus and that he eventually understood was something else entirely. Then he wrote the sentence I copied into my notes. I don't know when I stopped knowing the difference between what I could fix and what I couldn't. I just know that at some point I started treating those two things the same way and I was wrong. Marcus received that letter. He read it. He did not respond. That non-response was not nothing. It was a person deciding what something was worth to them on their own timeline, in their own terms. I respected that silence. The letter was the source of the grace current in this case. It had no legal utility. It arrived as a man doing something he had been putting off for 3 years. The defense offered 2 arguments at trial. First, that the words in the waiting room did not satisfy the intent threshold required under the statute. Second, that the practice had made good faith remediation efforts. The first required the court to believe that 4 unconnected witnesses had all misread the context of a sentence whose context was not ambiguous. The second required a definition of remediation the documentary record could not support. I heard both arguments completely. Then the defense said something in closing I did not expect. Dr. Forsyth's attorney said, "My client did not make a medical judgment. He made a human failure. He has said so. He is saying so now." I did not expect the word failure to be offered plainly from that table. It was not a legal calculation. It was the closest thing to simple truth spoken from that side of the proceedings. I gave it the weight it had earned. Here is what I am offering you. The rest of this story told exactly the way I have been telling it. Nothing eased before its time, nothing resolved before it has earned that resolution. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. Dr. Forsyth took the stand on September 14th, 2023, at 10:20 in the morning. His own attorney asked what he would want Marcus to hear from him if Marcus were willing. He said, "I've been doing this for 22 years. The worst thing I ever did took about 4 seconds. I don't know what to do with that." He said it looking at the table in front of him, not at Marcus, not at the gallery, just at the table. I wrote it down and looked at it for a long time after the session ended. Both things I had been feeling all week were in that one sentence, the sorrow of the waiting room and the thing I still had no name for. Both rivers in 10 words. I did not expect that. On the third day, a witness named Rosa Cantu took the stand. She was 58 years old, a patient in that waiting room on March 8, 2022. She had seen everything. After she described what she had witnessed, she did something no one had asked her to do. She looked at Marcus Webb and said, "I thought about you every day since then. I am sorry I didn't say something." Then she looked at Dr. Forsyth and said, "I hope you are becoming someone different." One sentence for one river, one for the other. She said both in the same breath, without coaching, without apparent awareness that she had just done the thing the entire legal architecture of that room had been reaching toward and had not quite managed. I watched Marcus when she said it. He had turned to face her, his profile in the courtroom light. He did not look relieved. He looked witnessed, like something in him had been seen by someone who was not required to see it and had chosen to anyway. I know that feeling from the inside. My mother died in the summer of 2009. She had been ill for 2 years and the dying was not sudden, but the absence was. I believed while she was sick that I was preparing for what was coming. I was not. I was just spending time near someone I loved while they were still there. After she was gone, I spent months becoming harder at the edges, shorter with people who needed patience, less available to the kind of attention that costs something to give. Not cruel. But I understood, sitting in that courtroom, how grief turned inward can start to reduce the people around you to their surfaces, how you can stop distinguishing between what cannot be fixed and what can be, because the distinction requires a tenderness that grief sometimes takes without asking. I place this memory here not as excuse for what he did. I place it here because it is where I was standing when I heard him say those words on the stand. I was not outside that sentence. I was in it. Marcus gave his own brief testimony the same morning. Asked about the psychological impact of the waiting room incident, he said, "I had spent 1.5 years working toward being able to walk into a room. That day I went back to the beginning." He said it quietly, without visible emotion. That sentence is the sorrow current at its most precise, what was lost in its plainest form. But later that afternoon, while both attorneys were at the bench on a procedural matter, something happened that no one planned. Dr. Forsyth at his table turned in his chair until he was facing Marcus Webb. He held that position for 5 seconds. No words, no nod, just turned toward him. Marcus did not look up. The 5 seconds ended. Dr. Forsyth turned back to the table. His attorney was still speaking to me. There were no cameras pointed at the defendant's table in that moment. He turned toward Marcus when nobody official was watching. That turn belonged to both rivers at once, full of the weight of what he had done and full of something that was the quiet opposite of what he had said in that waiting room. I cannot tell you what it meant to Marcus Webb. I can tell you what it meant to me when I saw it from the bench. I just realized, saying this out loud, that I have never put into words what it means to watch a person turn towards someone they hurt when no one official is watching. Subscribe, because what I ordered from the bench was built on moments like that one. The sentencing is coming. Subscribe now. On September 19, 2023, I entered the courtroom at 9 a.m. to deliver the ruling and sentence. Dr. Forsyth was already seated. Marcus entered 2 minutes later with both hands flat on the table, the same posture as the first morning. The room was full. I had notes on the bench that I did not look at once I began. My hands rested flat in front of me, and I looked at both tables, at Marcus with his eyes on me, and at Dr. Forsyth with his pen down and his shoulders carrying something heavy. I held both of them in my full attention for the length of that pause. Then I spoke. I found Dr. Alan Forsyth liable under Ohio Revised Code Section 4112 and for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I delivered the following sentence. I am ordering you to pay $285,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. $200,000 placed in direct trust for Marcus Webb, for his reconstructive care at any provider of his choosing, the choice you made in that waiting room having already taken one option away. $85,000 donated to the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, an organization that funds what your 4 words tried to foreclose, the belief that a life changed by fire still deserves access, dignity, and the question of what is possible. That money is not a price. There is no price. It is a statement about where your resources must now go. I am also ordering 200 hours of clinical service over 12 months at the Ohio Valley Burn Center at University of Cincinnati Medical Center, reconstructive consultations at no charge for patients referred by the social work team, specifically patients who have been told elsewhere that their cases present nothing to work with. You will see those patients. You will bring your 22 years to each one of them, not because the court requires you to perform care, but because what you said in that waiting room showed you had lost track of something you once knew. This is the structure in which you may find it again. And there is one more thing. You are to make yourself available for one meeting with Marcus Webb, at a location of his choosing, at a time he determines within 18 months. No attorneys, no record, no requirement that Marcus say a single word. I am not ordering forgiveness. I am not ordering resolution. I am ordering the removal of the official distance between you and the possibility of one honest human encounter, because every person in that waiting room on March 8, 2022 deserves to be in the same room as the person who chose to treat them as a surface and to have that person's full human attention for whatever they decide to do with it. You may complete the service requirement in 10 months if, at the 6-month mark, you submit your consultation record alongside a written reflection addressed not to this court, but to the version of yourself who walked through that door at 2:15 p.m. on March 8, 2022. I'm giving you that benchmark because the evidence I observed over 7 days suggests you are someone capable of doing hard things with genuine care when you are willing to be present for them. I believe you are still capable of that. That is the conclusion of the evidence. Then I looked at the room and I said, what you did in that office, Dr. Forsyth, is what happens when suffering turns inward long enough to stop recognizing suffering in others. You lost your son. That loss was real, and I am not setting it aside. But it is not a cause for what happened in that room, and I believe you know that. I say it here because it belongs in the record, that this court sees you as someone broken by something true, and that this sentence is not designed to break you further. It is designed to return you to the room where the work is, to the people in it. For Marcus Webb, what was said to you in that waiting room was said by someone who had stopped seeing people. It was not a medical finding. It was not a truth of any kind. You came asking what was still possible. That question deserved a better room. I believe you will keep looking until you find one. And one plain fact, for everyone present, a man who survived a fire still had to survive a waiting room. That is what this case was about. That is what it will always be about. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect, because what I just said, a man who survived a fire and still had to survive a waiting room, I have not said that simply like that before today, and I need a second with it. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay. Okay, let me keep going. When I finished speaking, the room went quiet. Then, from the second row of the gallery, a woman began to cry. Not loudly. The way a person cries when something they have been holding very tightly is allowed to come down. I did not know who she was. I watched her for 2 seconds. Both rivers were in what I saw on her face. Then I looked down at my notepad. I sat still for a moment. Then I stood. On April 3, 2024, Marcus Webb sent a 12-word message to Dr. Forsyth's office. His attorney included it in a routine compliance update, and that is how it reached me. The message said, "I didn't want you to be ruined. I just wanted you to know." I read it at my desk on a Thursday afternoon and sat with it for a while before putting it down. The sorrow of what had been done and the grace of what Marcus chose to do with it, both were present in those 12 words. Neither one canceled the other. That is the only way those two things can coexist honestly, and he understood that. Dr. Forsyth did not appeal. No challenge was filed. The compliance period ran on schedule. At the 6-month mark, he submitted the documentation required for early completion consideration. I received it in March of 2024. I read his written reflection. I will not share what it said. It was addressed to someone else, but it was written by someone who had arrived somewhere different from where he started. I accepted the documentation. He completed the service in 10 months. My honest response when I heard that, not triumph, not relief, something quieter, the specific feeling of a door that was open, staying open. This case showed me something I am still working out. Holding two feelings at once, real grief and real grace, without collapsing one into the other, is not confusion. It is sometimes the most precise response available. I have been on the bench for 31 years. Most of what I do requires me to decide. This case required me to hold. I have learned since September of 2023 that holding is sometimes the harder and more precise thing. To anyone who recognizes something of Marcus Webb's experience, who knows what it is to have a wound treated as grounds for erasure, especially by someone whose role was to help, I want to say this. I watched Marcus over 7 days of proceedings. I watched the cost of what he was doing, and I watched what the sorrow did not take from him. His attention on the room, his insistence that the room meet him with the dignity he arrived carrying. He did not get smaller over those 7 days. He stayed the exact size he had walked in at. That was larger than what had been done to him. I saw it clearly. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. I want you to hold it. Subscribe before we go further, because what happened after I said it is the part of this case I have carried the longest. Subscribe now. To anyone who recognizes themselves in Dr. Forsyth's position, who made a real choice that caused real harm and is now living with the question of what comes next, one observation. The people I have watched move towards something after that kind of moment are not the ones who argued most skillfully in their own defense. They are the ones who turned toward the person they hurt even when nobody official was watching. That is where it starts. And one thing I have never said in any other professional context before this case, the damage you caused does not permanently define you unless you make it the last thing you do. The room is still there. You can still turn toward it. I said at the beginning that I had never felt grief and grace in the same moment before this case. That was true. I have felt them together many times since, not because this case resolved them into something clean, but because it showed me that they do not need to be resolved. They can both be held with both hands, and that holding is itself a kind of answer. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe. The comments below this video are a room where people who are willing to feel two things at once tend to find each other. Come into that room. Marcus Webb. Oh, anyone who has ever made Dr. Hale's calculation, not necessarily in medicine, not necessarily with those stakes, but in any situation where you ran a number before you ran to help.